Greetings and welcome to Pinball Help. Mike here. Today I'm going to do another in my series of features of basic pinball machines. This one is going to be on, the last one was on tilt and I just tilted out. I'm going to have to adjust the tilt in this. This one is on flippers. What is the deal with flippers? How do they work? And what do you need to know about flippers? Well, they're really cool. They allow you to hit the ball around. And they're basically the distinctive feature of pinball machines. So, how do they work? And why do they work? And why is it buzzing? Let's talk about flippers. So, this is what you see on the top part of the pinball machine. You see the flipper up here. And what exactly happens when you hit that button, and how do flippers work? They're a pretty interesting technological advancement that has largely been unchanged for the last 60 years. So the way these things were designed decades ago are still pretty much the way that they work today. So let's take a look at the underside of a game and see how a flipper actually works, shall we? So right next, we have another 1970s era Gottlieb, and this is just a great example of a simple flipper game. And so let's look at the two flippers. So flippers are basically powered by an electromagnet that we call a coil or a solenoid, and that's this right here. So here's one flipper. Here's another flipper. Now, it is odd that they're oriented in a different manner. This is probably because of the playfield layout and where they needed space. But these are basically the two flippers, and they basically do operate in the same way. The flipper up top is connected here, and when this thing energizes, it makes the flipper go like that. This one, when this energizes, it makes the flipper go like that up top. So you have a bat up top on a little spindle that's connected to this little rotating thing. And then you have here, this is what's known as a linkage. In the older games, these are made out of Bakelite. In newer games, they're made out of nylon or plastic. And then you have right here, this is a metal plunger. And let me make sure that you can see this. Yeah, let's zoom in closer on this one and we'll talk about this particular component of this. So you have your plunger, you have your link, and then this is just kind of the end of the assembly. Now there's a little spring in here that makes it snap back. And different types of flipper assemblies have different types of spring mechanisms, but they all basically work the same way. You have this coil here, which is an electromagnet, and when it's energized, it magnetizes and it pulls in, it sucks in the plunger, which converts electrical energy into mechanical energy. That in turn pushes the linkage, which connects to the little swing arm here, which makes the flipper flip up top. And it's a simple mechanism. Bam, flip, 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 flip. Now you hear that click? That is the plunger hitting the coil stop. There's a little metal stop here at the end, and that keeps it from going any further, since it's just, this magnet. Now what is this coil? A coil is literally that. It's a coil of copper wire, thin copper wire that is insulated, that is wrapped around a small little core. So this winding of copper wire is what generates the magnetic force when you apply electricity to it. So when you hit the flipper button, what you're doing is you're completing the circuit. There's about anywhere from 30 to 50 volts. In these older machines, they're AC. In newer machines, it's DC. But the voltage is sitting here at one lug, and the other lug is connected to the flipper button. When you press the flipper button, what you're doing is you're grounding it. You're completing the circuit so the electricity can travel through. If you got power going to one wire and it's not connected to anything, power doesn't go anywhere. It has to have some place to go through. So when you hit the flipper button, you're completing the circuit, and then this thing gets energized. It magnetizes, sucks it in, converts electrical energy into mechanical energy, and makes the flipper flip. And that is basically, in a nutshell, how this flipper and all flippers work, right? There's a few other little extra things with flippers. You see there's a switch right here, and there's a little nub that's sticking out. So when this thing flips, it's breaking a little switch right here. So what is that? That is called the end of stroke switch. Now, why is that there? Why is there a switch that opens when the flippers are all the way up? Well, you might think, oh, well, there are some games where you can use the flippers to like change lights, so that's how the game senses it. But no, that's not why that's there. And in these old games, they didn't have that feature. If there was a sensor for when you press the flipper button, that switch is likely to be on the actual flipper button, not down here near the flipper assembly. So what is this? This is an end of stroke switch. Now, what this does is something pretty interesting. If you look at the coil here, you will see that there's 3 lugs. 1, 2, 3. What we have here is not just a single wound coil. There's 2 separate windings of copper insulated wire on this coil. So this is a dual winding coil. What does that mean? It means that there's 2 parts. There's 2 different types of electromagnets built into this one flipper thing. Why are there 2? Because the nature of how you need flipper power, right? So when you initially press the flipper button and this thing gets sucked in, you need quite a bit of energy, magnetic energy, electrical energy, to pull that in. It creates a certain amount of force, right? But once the flipper is up, you don't need that much energy. You just need enough to just keep it in there. So it takes more energy to initially flip the flipper than it does to keep it in an upright position. And as you know, when you're playing pinball, if you hold the button up, the flipper just stays up. So why is there 2 coils instead of 1? Because the initial amount of power needed to flip the flipper up, which is also enough power to throw around a heavy steel ball, and these balls here are solid steel, so they're very heavy. So you need, you can't use a Nerf bat to knock one of these things around. You got to have enough power. You got to have, so the high power portion of the coil that can bat that ball around is quite high. So what happens is when you apply electricity to it and it becomes an electromagnet, it heats up. And if that was the only portion of the coil that we had, the longer it was powered, the more it would get hot. It would get hotter and hotter to the point where it would melt. So you need a high power portion of the coil initially, and then you switch over to the low power, which can be run for an extended amount of time without overheating. That is why you have the end of stroke switch. This senses when the flipper gets to its apex, it breaks this little connection and it switches the circuit from the high power portion to the low power coil. So it's automatic, because the way things work is when there's electricity to a circuit and then the electricity flows through it, it's going to go to the path of least resistance. The high power coil is a bigger winding. It's a heavier winding of wire, and it's usually less numbers of winds. So it's going to be the bigger path. That's where the electricity is going to run through. More of it is going to run through faster, and it's going to give you more power. But it's also going to generate more heat. So if this switch is broken, the high power coil is cut off, and then the only exit out is the low power. So it switches from the high power to the low power, keeps the flipper up. So that's how all flippers work. Now, one of the interesting things about this is, if you've ever wondered why so many people say, don't rapid fire flip the flippers, don't do like that, because that will cause problems. If you see like a kid and they're down there on the machine and they're going, that's high power, high power, high power, high power. Okay? It's the equivalent of the high power coil being on all the time. When I flip it like this, it's high power and then it switches to low power, and so the coil won't get very hot. If too much power goes through the high power portion of this coil for too long, it will damage the coil. It absolutely will. And everybody that's owned a pinball machine for a certain amount of time, or has gone through enough of them, has run into this where coils get burned. If the switch malfunctions and it's not working properly, or somebody does that rapid fire flip, they can actually physically damage the coil. This thing will get so hot that it will melt. It will literally melt, and then and then it'll be stuck. This plunger won't be able to go in. Maybe it gets stuck in. Maybe it gets stuck partial way out. There's a sleeve in there too that can melt, and then it's just ruined. Then you have to replace the whole coil and the assembly here in order to get it working again. So that's how these flippers work, why the coils work, why it's bad to not do that rapid fire flipping thing. So a few other little things. You hear that buzz right there on the flippers? That's not unusual. Sometimes it's just tolerances and the nature of the plunger that's in there vibrating. Other times it's the result of the coil stop. So right? So what would make that buzz? Sometimes there's a little gap between the plunger and the coil stop, and it buzzes. Sometimes the coil stop can get magnetized, and it'll cause that buzzing. There's a number of things, but if you know, it's more normal than it is abnormal on these older games. Newer games, you almost never hear it. But if you do have that buzzing, you can probably get rid of it by replacing the coil stop, making sure that's not magnetized, and checking your plunger to make sure that it's not too damaged and some stuff like that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. A bad thing would be the flipper stuck powered up, or not moving at all. So there in a nutshell is how flippers work. Simple little device that's basically been unchanged since the very beginning of flipper pinball. Simple design, elegant, works really, really well. And there have been some other different ways of pivoting the flippers in different manners. And there's different types of assemblies that vary from the Babylonians to Atari to Stern. There's slight minor differences in how these linkages are made up, but essentially all flippers basically work the same way. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this little quick understanding how flippers work. And for more, be sure to visit PinballHelp.com, click like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, YouTube/PinballHelp. And until next time, thanks for watching.